Welcome to the Long Thread podcast about spinning, stitching, and weaving by hand. This series is sponsored by Long Thread Media, publishers of Spin-Off, Piecework, and Handwoven magazines. Find us online and subscribe at longthreadmedia.com. I'm your host, co-founder Ann Marrow. Norman Kennedy is a national living treasure. Don't take my word for it. He's the recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts National Heritage Fellowship, which is the United States' highest honor for folk and traditional arts. Norman was recognized for both his singing and textile knowledge. He grew up singing with and learning from elders in northern Scotland, and he first visited the United States in 1965 to sing at the famous Newport Folk Festival. He served as master weaver for Colonial Williamsburg from 1967 through 1972, then founded the Marshfield School of Weaving in northern Vermont in 1976. In his world travels, Norman has learned from traditional textile makers, some among the last to practice their arts. He has also lectured, sung, and led walkings, sharing the knowledge of the old ways. Speaking to me in Colorado, from the 19th century Vermont barn that houses the weaving school, we face some sound challenges, but as you'll hear, Norman comes through loud and clear. He is a storyteller in the old fine tradition. One note. Kate Smith, the director of the Marshfield School of Weaving, provided technical assistance and a little commentary. So, Norman, how would you like me to introduce you?
Well, I belong Aberdeen. I don't come from the town of Aberdeen. I belong there. And my folk have been there in written history since the very, very early 1300s. And they're still there. Quite a lot of Danish Viking blood in me because they settled there. Of course, the Danes ruled half of what is now England, and then the Norwegians further north. But I know the fields that my great-great-grandfather ploughed, and there's a standing stone circle there. Aberdeenshire is littered with Neolithic stuff, just littered. So I was raised seeing that stuff. We were working class people, so I was out working in the fields by the time I was 11. The potato harvest and the war was still going on. I mean, we got bombed out our place. So I've seen war. And I know my mother went hungry to make sure that we ate. But anyway, and my folk and my father's side were shipbuilders, very famous schooners, very famous. And then they sailed them. My father was 3 times around the world at least, several times to this country. A great-grandfather, my mother's grandfather, he died in Philadelphia. He went across. So I've had folk in this country at least since the 1700s. I think maybe in my mother's side, 1600s. So I'm just I'm a recent wave, as you might say. I literally do have distant family relatives here in Vermont. They came across for the granite quarries, and Aberdeen's a granite place, you see. So that's my roots are very strong there. And there were textile workers amongst them. In the factory, the cotton factories, lousy jobs, but they had to work at something, And my mother's side, my father's either grandfather or great-grandfather was jacquard loom weaver, fine linen, except there was a linen factory started in Aberdeen, a very unhealthy place for the poor lassies to work. But so he was starving and he had to go to sea. So when I started even thinking about making a little loom, they thought I was nuts. They really did, because they had seen the poverty side of it, and I didn't. So I was near it. I was only 2 generations away from it. Oh, didn't get I hear about it? But I have no idea it was my blood to do this stuff. And a great deal of, no help at all, except for a very few old people who recognized what I was doing. And they would say, well, like my grandma used to say, if you're going to Dietrich, because we spoke old dialect, that's my native tongue. And anyway, If you're going to do it right, or don't do it at all. And I said that to many students, and haven't I heard them pass that on? Now, if you're going to do this, do it right or don't do it at all. I thought, Grandma, your words are still alive and well, and it's made a difference. People have said that to me, you know, it, they were doing work, but it wasn't great. But me saying to them, come on now, straighten up, you could do better than that. And they get upset about it, but then it really made a difference to them. So that's then I made a little, when I left school at 16. I was late leaving school. My folk all left at 13 and 14, went to work. But when I was
What made you
younger,
decide to
by the
start a
time I
weaving
was
school?
17, I was working in the civil service because I left a really good job, safe job, which left me plenty of time to go around Britain singing. But every year they'd send me down to Edinburgh for training, but I spent most of my time in the museums there. None of my folk ever stepped into a museum. None of them. I love museums and Neolithic stuff, loom weights. That's when I first saw loom weights for the warp weight loom. Um, Ancient spindle whorls, loads and loads. Folk were always losing their whorls. But anyway, some beauties too, right in Aberdeen, where I come from, they're finding that stuff. But then look at the textiles I was seeing. People people going abroad. Scotch folk have always had to go abroad, to just make a living and just see other parts of the world. My father was 3 times in the world. Well, he was in India. Look at all the sarongs and that he'd seen. And then his brother was a missionary in China. Look at the weaving there. And they told me about that. One time as I say, every third year I'd be sent to London. Look at the time I spent in the Victoria and Albert Museum. You see, I was weaving, as I say, kaleems and small kaleems. Tapestry woven. I mean, I can weave it now, those style. Used to. My lads wouldn't do it now. Don't want to. Did it. But anyway, I'd go to the front desk, and of course, she knew I was Scotch a minute open. And she says, "And how can we help you?" I says, "Could I get the key to the carpet gallery?" And why? I says, "Well, I'm a weaver and spinner." Oh, very good. Because the museums belong to the public at home. So, of course, Britain's still home to me. Anyway, I'd go in there, and here's all sorts of cultures: floor covers, carpets, um, the gorgeous dragon carpets from China, and for putting around the pillars in the temples. Not for the floor, not so. And they were all hanging on things like pages in a book. And I count how many ends to the ancient things I got. So I just said, and then I come to this country and the pre-Columbian stuff that I've seen in different places. I've been to every state, and then in Mexico, north, south, east, and west. And I've watched the women and the young girls weaving, spinning and weaving for their own clothes and then for sale on backstrap looms, loads of times. So I just, as I say, my grandma said, "You're a sponge for our knowledge, lassie."
So, what made you decide to start a weaving school?
I didn't want to start a weaving school. I've been working almost 6 years in Williamsburg, Virginia, master weaver there. Far, far. I'm from the north. I'm from 500 miles further north than here, you know, opposite Norway and Denmark. My folks are. That's how, as I say, there's Danish Viking blood in me. So I'd been doing there, and I was slowly getting sicker and sicker with colitis. A small, like 100 degrees, 102 degrees in the summer, and a very small weaving house. One, two, three, four looms, one out in the porch. And some days, 6,000 human beings going past. The smell of human beings was amazing. And it was getting me, I would land up in the hospital with a colitis. And I thought, if I don't move, but of course, it was singing, it brought me to this country. I was invited to represent Scotland in 65, one from England, one from Ireland, one from Scotland. to show the roots of the American ballad singing tradition. But I was the only one that really come from a living ballad. And I knew some of these ballads by the time I was 13. Listened to street singers. I mean, this is stuff, it's my history. Songs from the 15th, songs that were known when Shakespeare was around. And the language, my dialect wasn't all that different from that. So I understood that. Mike Seeger, Pete Seeger's half brother, heard me, brought me across. And then one of the men, Ralph Rinsler, who was on the board, he invited me the next year to come and help him start a business in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and at crafts business. So we went down. The first year I was here, I was in the Appalachians and the Ozarks, Louisiana, up amongst Cajun speakers. But the 3 years that I was at the school, the last year, I had French there. I've never forgotten it because I learned French songs. So I still know that. And I can manage pretty much French, not Parisian French, Normandy French, different. So anyway, so, and I was amongst blues singers in the Mississippi Delta. And I mean, I saw the color bar in 1967, full strength, you know. And of course, I didn't know any of that stuff. So that when I went to work in Williamsburg, the thing in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the business shut down because Ralph was asked to start the Smithsonian Festival on the Mall, which was huge. Well, I was up to my eyes in that immediately, you see. And then the first year I was here, I was in amongst Indian tribes at home. I saw Pueblo dancing, religious dances. So I was inundated, but I had a good, strong culture of my own. So I appreciate it, and I still do. I was given a Navajo name in the 70s, you know, I've been a lot of, and I can weave Navajo style, the big blanket I wove, spin and weave. So not only this stuff here, but other people's cultures are really soaked up, you know.
So, what brought you to the US the first time was singing. And now I know you for spinning and weaving, but for you, those things aren't that far apart, are they? They're related.
Very much so. Very much so. I mean, quite a lot. It's a big. Now, I was singing in front of 19,000, 12,000. But I said, I'll show you, I'll take on a big wheel, walking back and forth, spinning and singing the ballads. And that folk loved it. They saw what these ballads were used for. It's repetitive work. You know, I've heard the women singing these old ballads, gotten 1890 women, gotten heron. Lousy jobs, singing modern stuff. And of course, I know modern stuff as well, and Mexican, American. I've only got one Spanish song, but plenty Quebec songs, Acadian songs, Cajun songs, you know. But and a lot of them were from. I saw the last of the people living like 1700s in Scotland, out in the country, no electricity, no running water in the house, having to do your business in a bucket outside, you know, in a outhouse. I was used to that till I come into this country. I never lived in a house till I come to this country with central heating or hot running water. It was great. And then power tools, I built my looms. I built my own looms at home. Had to. I would go down to the shore and pray to the old gods for a storm. And the boats coming across from Scandinavia, they were loaded with cargo. On the deck, they had timber, deck cargo. In a storm, some of that would be torn up and it'd land up, and I would pray to Thor. My name is Norman. My grandmother insisted I be called that. In Gaelic, it's Toramich, which means Thor's man. So he's my main man, you see, Thor. Anyway, Thursday is from Thor, Thursday. But anyway, so I found nice pieces of timber and I built quite a large loom. And then I was weaving at home tweed for my own folks, good quality tweed, spinning, shearing the sheep, doing the whole blessed thing, you know. My folk thought I was nuts. But the older people whose young folk in the family weren't interested. But here I come along and they say, and the Gaelic speaking areas, they would say to me, Well, June and Garam, are you dyeing the blue, meaning indigo? Leisha Weischer with a mixture, which meant urine. I said, sure. Okay, I was, that one thing was the open sesame. I was working class like them. So the stuff they told me, and they didn't let me away with anything. Carding, they would stand over me and watch what I was doing carding, which was invaluable because I was the only one in the country. Even yet, when I go back there, I've taught hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people here, but in Scotland, Canada, even once in England. So uh, I got it at the last gasp. And the same in Appalachians. Once I went down there into the Ozarks, I was at home because I knew how to run a still by the time I was 14. Because I was making wine when I was 14. I've just stopped that with a lot of wine and some good vodka that I made from the potatoes here years ago. But so here's me going down to whiskey making country and saying it, and maybe once I was here and then going down, taking some of myself. Oh, was I one of the boys, you know? And the amount of people down there that said, You're Scotch. They didn't use Scots like they do at home now. They're so anglicised at home now. You're Scotch, we're Scotch too. And they knew their people. And so it was open sesame. I just had to open my mouth, you know. It was different in other parts. But down there, I was just one of the boys, up here too, somewhat. So, but it was the singing. I made much, much more money singing. And then in Williamsburg, I said I'd come down. I had been kind of got a hint that I ever wanted to go, and I went down, and they took me on right away, and had a place to live, one of the little kitchens down there, and then I said to them, but I'm not going to stop going singing. It was the 70s, the late 60s, and the big festivals. I sung at all the big festivals here, and I made as much in a weekend as I would make in 4 or 5 weeks working there. And it was the same when I was here. I would go away teaching all around the country and singing each place I was teaching. So, and I'd come back with money. I wish I'd saved some of that money because I don't have that now. But I've had a very, very rich life because of the singing and the weaving and the spinning and all the textile stuff.
So one of the places that singing and weaving come together is at a Waulking. Can you tell me what that's like? And am I saying that right?
Waulking, yeah. Luach in Gaelic is Luach. But anyway, when wool cloth is woven, blankets or tweed, I did several types of tweed, heavy tweed and then really fine tweed. My folk and myself were dressed like lords and from the country, you know, and from the estates of the country. But it's just woolen cloth, it's just interlaced threads. And it needs to be thickened and shrunk. Oh, people say it's to set the dye and that sort of stuff. They don't know what they're talking about. 2 years ago, I was asked by a dear friend of mine, she's a professor across there, Gaelic speaker. Now, I am not a native Gaelic speaker. It wasn't allowed. You were punished. I was punished in school for saying one word, kettle, instead of tickle, because that was in the 1800s. The English said that all that stuff to be stamped out. They made a good job of it too. It's kind of, pardon me coming back, but I was asked to go to the Outer Hebrides to do a cultural tour. And this woman, dear friend of mine, Margaret Bennett, and she had got 2 pieces of tweed, enough to do 4 walkings, unshrunk tweed. It has to be, you have to watch what you're doing. You can overdo it. Between every song, you measure it to see how much is coming in. The first song, it comes in fast. And of course, I'll sing a Gaelic song because they ask me to sing a Gaelic song first. And some of them have heard the chorus. They can pick it up. And then I'll sing ballads. Again, I bring in the ballads and folks sing their heads off. I have sung up in Quebec French, and they go auprès de ma blonde. They go crazy, thumping away. But anyway, but no one alive, they said, had ever seen a Waulking in maybe 3 generations. They said they knew one old woman. She was 101, and when she was a very young woman, she sat in. Of course, you have to have muscles to do this, and the men did it up in Cape Breton. The men did it. So I did this up in Cape Breton. I would weave cloth here and we'd drive up to Cape Breton, tweed and blankets. And these men had done it in the 1940s, and then they stopped, but they knew how to. Oh boy, did I get a welcome there. It was just great. So I was a bit of a freak, you see. It takes freaks in this world to get things done. I've said that more. You see, also, when I was in Williamsburg, I told them I was still going singing, but they asked me would I do television work and radio work. I did so much television and radio work, I had to belong to AFTRA, the American Federation of Radio and Television Artists. I mean, I was singing, playing spoons one morning on the Today Show in New York with Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters next to me getting that. You have to get makeup on because you would look like death, so white in the lights. And Barbara Walters was doing her number next to me. Wow. So here's me playing the spoons. He said to me, I saw you on, because in movies, being at festivals, he says, you were singing and playing the spoons. I said, oh, but that was just because one of my mates had the spoons and I just picked them up. And he says, would you do it here? I said, well, I don't have spoons. He said, by a lucky chance, coming through the kitchen today, he went into his pocket and took out spoons. And here's me playing the spoons saying, look at you. How many millions saw that? It was hilarious. But it never bothered me because, a lot of famous singers had to get a bit stoned or a bit drunk. They went on because they were nervous. Never bothered me. I knew who I was. I knew my culture. I knew my songs, and I got people singing. People forget performers. People, if they know the stuff, they went to sing. Having 5,000-6,000 people joining in a chorus, the energy you get. You're putting out energy, but if you get the people involved, the energy. And it's the same with folk with the weaving and things like that. Once they catch on, and they start, you get energy back from them, you see. I could be doing with some of that energy now.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of energy to do a walking. When I saw you do a walking, you walked wedding blankets. Can you describe how that goes?
For a pair of blankets, 11 yards to shrink into 10. It comes in 4 inches per yard length. I would mark 40 inches for a yard, for a finished yard when I was weaving, you see. And then for blankets, 45, and they would come into with 41. You could push it further, but they would be like too much felted. So and you get that off the loom. You any darning to do, you do that, and then you take the two ends and sew them together. So I go take the two together, I sew them across, and then I turn it over and come back so that there's 3 layers. That's the way that I did it. And then you put it into hot water and soap. Now, the old people didn't have soap. Even the people here wouldn't have had much soap. They would have made soft soap with lye that they made with the ashes from the winter fire. And I've done all that sort of stuff too. Williamsburg did all that sort of stuff. And if I wanted to do anything old fashioned, they say, oh, go ahead. It was great. So anyway, but in the old days, they would have had this save urine, mostly men's, because there's stuff in women's urines.
That's a fallacy.
Well, Kate says a fallacy, but the old people wouldn't have believed that at all. They just didn't use the women's stuff. Young men, I'll have to talk to Kate later about that. Young men and some women, even here, I heard of a fella, he said one of his great aunts had pee parties. she would have the doctors and the lawyers come in, play cards, and she'd give them tea and cakes and things like that, and some beer. And then they'd go out and make their water, and she saved that, You're best to let it lie for a while because there's a lot of solids in urine. And people say, oh, it ferments. Now, I've been fermenting wine since I was 14. I never saw fermentation. It oxidizes, though, and it turns color, gets darker. So the longer you keep it, the better. But I'd use that in dyeing, too, when I was dyeing stuff. But anyway, you would use soap if you had it. No, they would take the big pot that you used for making soap, for scalding hogs and things like that, and rendering down lard, and that they take it down to stream, fill it up with water, and then half water and half stale urine. Put a fire under it, and when it was almost boiling, when it was seething, then they put in their cloth. And stir it about, and then take it up out of there, throw it right into the cold stream. If you did that with soap, which is an alkali, you're working with an acid, you see, working with an alkali. If you did that, boil that, it would felt like fury. It would be worse if you took it to the boiling and put it into the cold water. With the acid, no reaction. And that's how, and then when you're doing it by hand, we just wash it. It just, I've read articles by women in this country doing this, and they were well off women. It wasn't in their tradition. And they say, let it soak for 24 hours. 10 minutes is enough in the soapy water. And then wring it out on the table, throw it on the table, and then you start pounding. Not a lot of water comes out of it, Some people turn up with plastic around them, but no, I never did that. And then you're measuring, and then, okay, another song, and then, it needs another song. And I'd sing Gaelic and then English, and sometimes where the French speakers, French. But anyway, marching songs, you see. But and the walking songs were made for this purpose. I know walking songs from the end of the 1500s. You can tell because of the heroes that the songs were made. And now these songs were made really, really extensive songs. And Gaelic is it's a hard language to because there's just more vocabulary. And now these folks weren't allowed to read and write, but these women could make up the verses right there on the table. They were full of that stuff. There'd be a little left doing that, And here's just ordinary housewives, but the skills that they had,
So I saw Walking in a movie, and there were like 3 or 4 women who were coming in and out, going back and forth, and it looked like they were dancing the maypole or like doing the hokey pokey. But that's not what a walking is, right?
No. It's on a table, or they used to do it on wattles. You know what wattles are? Woven branches and things like that. And they did it with their feet. And they singing and putting their feet, 1600s. And actually, up in Cape Breton one time, a man said that to me. They used to do the castle walk, the foot walking. But then latterly, they did it on a board or just planks. Put the planks on 2 barrels and things like that, and they'd sit around it. It's really energetic work. But then the old people that I knew, the women, they had muscles. I mean, if I annoyed my mother, she could knock me down. They were working hard all the time, and they had muscles. Nowadays, it's not like that. But whatever. So, what else do you want to know?
So you've got the fabric on the table, and the ends are sewn together. And you've got people sitting around the table, and you're singing. But then what happens? How does it go?
Yeah, you're moving it. You pound it, move it sunwise. Very, very unlucky to put against the sun. You're pounding it and passing it, pounding it and passing it. And I do with the old times, start slow until everybody gets going. And then you can speed it up, and you'll measure it. And you measure it with this, 4 inches. Measure so. Oh, another song. No, you need another song yet. It all depends on the person who's woven it, because you're working to what they need. And I usually have them to this side, next to my heart, So but it was very ritualistic in the old days. And sometimes, if it was for the cloth that the men were going to wear out in the boats, because they were going fishing out in the Atlantic in open boats, So they needed stuff. They had no waterproof stuff, oilskins, nothing like that. So they would have, sometimes they would wear out a team of women, and another team would come in. They'd soak it again. They'd put water over the water and urine mixture, You know that Outlander business? Did you ever watch the Outlander series?
I haven't seen it.
But they had a loo walk in there, and a woman ran out and then come back with a bucket. She'd peed in the bucket. That was a lot of nonsense, because not one of the women there had been to, in the film, had seen a real thing, but they were just making up folklore. All folklore had to be made up, all of it. So, and then once you get that finished, and then you got to pull it straight and join, get it down to the other end, and then you start rolling it up on a board, a plank, with a plank inside that I've used for many, many years. Smooth it, turn it, smooth it. There's songs there for that too. And then once it's finished, you set it up when it's in a bucket or something, or outside, and it just drains, you see. And then you open it up to dry. If it's rainy, which it is a lot in Scotland, you would take a dry board and start rolling from the outside in and swap it back and forth 2-3 times. But if you didn't do that, the cloth, especially to go to the tailor, would be wrinkled, and the tailor would have a hard job. He'd have to wet it again and iron it smooth, you see. So that's because the people that I knew were doing this when they were younger were making tweed from their blankets for themselves, some tweed for themselves, but tweed to sell, especially on the mainland, that the gentry, the well-off people, would use when they were hunting deer and that in the hills, because it was almost bulletproof, it was waterproof almost. But anyway, so they had to get it really nice and tight. The walking was essential. They never did it to tartan. What I'm talking about is woolen cloth. Tartan was made from longer fleece that was combed, put up on the distaff, the jalakan, no, the koika, and then spun with the distaff and spindle. There's plenty places in the world that's never seen a spinning wheel yet, People are still spinning, because there's a lot of poor people and getting poorer too. So anyway, that's how the woolen cloth was finished. But the tartan was smooth, tight woven, not particularly warm, but more windproof and waterproof. But the tweed was warm and the blankets were warm. So that's the story of the walking.
So how did you learn to walk cloth?
When I was doing it by myself and doing blankets and that, I put it into a tub. The name Walker, Walker, that's the trade that people came from. And you put it in, I've done this, I've shown people, you put it in the bathtub, a small piece, and you tramp it, but you don't splash. You balance on the balls of your feet and hit it with your heels. And then you turn it with your feet, turn it with your feet. Oh, yes, I've done that many a time. Yeah.
So then you hadn't been part of a walking before you started leading them, is that right?
No, but I heard of. They told me, and they asked me why. Son and Gaelic, why? We had to do that. Why do you don't need to do that now? And as I say, it was strange. Just as well it was strange. Nobody else was picking it up. Honestly, nobody else. Amazing. But they are now, because as I say, I've shown them across the years. And me coming from the Northeast, they kind of freaked out quietly that I was speaking their language, because they couldn't speak mine. They couldn't talk my dialect. Yep.
So it's really important to you to preserve what those old folks taught you.
It was important to me, but I had never any thought in Scotland of teaching anybody else. They would have told me to go and get lost. As I say, I was getting prizes at the Royal Highland Show in um, Edinburgh for tweed, and this was in a tweed weaving country. But then, see, as I say, I was shearing the sheep and getting the dye in the wool, mixing the different colours for tweed, different colours, and then sending it to the mill to get half to get carded into roving, and I would spend by hand, and then half to turn into the warp. That was a common practice with the folk in the West Coast, And I was out in the West Coast when I was 20. I did see young girls doing a walking when I was 20 out there, but they were just putting a hand in hand, just little girls. You needed strong women to do that, and sometimes the men would go, as I say, help. But, and even then I thought, oh, this is freakish. But the 21, then I started going to the island of Barra. It's Barra dialect. The Catholic people there, so my folk weren't Catholic at all. But anyway, and then they started telling me stuff. Well, you see, I was in places that had no electricity. So he had loads of time to sit and listen. And they happened to be really interesting people. They would tell me stories in English because my Gaelic was not strong enough, and even yet, the complexities of the language. So they were translating stories that they'd never heard in English, but they were telling it me in English, and I've still got it in my head. I mean, that stuff never recorded. I have stuff in my head that's never been recorded. Long stories, not jokes or anything, but traditional tales from maybe 1400s. One of them would be 1400s, early Viking times when the Vikings were still there. So anyway, but I'd never thought of teaching anybody when I come to this country. No, it was interesting, but to me, it was always the singing along with it. Always. And I always made more money singing than teaching or weaving.
Thanks so much to Kate Smith for her help. In future episodes, I'll speak with Norman in depth about spinning and weaving. But in the meantime, you can find his course From Wool to Waulking and his video Spin Cotton and Flax on learn.longthreadmedia.com. Thank you for listening to the Long Thread Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks again.